This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed.
The weekly wrap is the week in news and what's coming up. I'm Claire Kimball.
And I'm Jodie Spears.
We're starting with the rolling maul that has been the Liberal Party's net zero abandonment. There's been a million meetings this week and it's close to being settled.
I think probably 3 or 4 meetings, more accurately.
Just feels like a million.
Does feel like a lot. We're also talking about the latest in the Trump-Epstein saga and violent crime adult time laws in Victoria.
And we've got a bit of housekeeping for you, which is what every good Saturday needs. Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Two big names from the last century died in the last week, John Laws and Graham Richardson. You went to Laws's home.
I did. I had a few encounters with Lawsy over the years. First heard him on my nan's wireless growing up.
Yeah.
And then I worked at 2UE when he was there, the king of Australian radio, that very, very deep voice. My late father-in-law was his manager. So we found ourselves one day down at his apartment on the Finger Wharf at Woolloomooloo. And it was quite surreal. It was like no other home you would ever visit. He and his wife, Caroline, the princess, were avid travellers. So they used to go all over the world and pick up all these amazing artefacts that were around their home. So we had a bit of a mini tour. There was this marble column that I remember kind of in the middle of the living room. I don't know the details, but it was like from 2nd century Greece or something like that. And it was just, it was like nothing you would see anywhere else. Amazing.
Just your average apartment in Sydney.
Yeah, strolling through with the champers and looking at the artefacts.
Just gorgeous. One of my very early jobs in politics was listening to Lawsy every single morning.
Wow, every day.
For 2 years I did that. 3 hours he broadcasted for every morning. So I became very fond of Lawsy over the years. Yeah, I really came to enjoy him. He was such a skilled broadcaster. I was reminded this week of that Paul Keating quote about him, if you educate John Laws, you educate Australia. That was the sort of, I guess, reach of Lawsy back in the day.
He spent a lot of time with Australia's PMs as well. He interviewed 17 prime ministers during a career that spanned more than 70 years. He died at 90. Someone else who spent a lot of time with PMs over the years was Graham Richardson. He also passed away last weekend.
Yeah, so Prime Minister Anthony Albanese this week called him a Labor legend and said that he was someone who was a real character. Bob Carr, the former New South Wales Premier and Foreign Minister, also praised his colossal environmental achievements. It's probably from his time in government the thing that he's best known for. That included World Heritage listings for the Daintree and for Kakadu. There were some really big things there. It's really hard, though, to explain Graham Richardson without completely derailing this podcast.
Yeah, he was a many-faceted man, you would say.
Yeah.
There was a reason why you wanted to mention his death as well.
There was, because in the spirit of News Club, I think if you were just glancing across the news, you would see a lot of affection for Graham Richardson. I reckon the Financial Review's editorial, though, is really something to behold. It starts with this paragraph: "The inclination to gloss over a person's faults in the days after their death is perfectly understandable. But if there were ever a case to make an exception for it, it's Graham Richardson."
Yeah.
And it goes on from there.
It goes on from there. There will be a link to that in the episode notes if you want to have a read of that, get across it. It's behind a paywall. Let's get into the biggest story of the week, though, and that's the Coalition's abandoning of their climate policy, supporting the target of reaching net zero emissions by 2050.
We can now say coalition because the Nats went first, and then on Thursday the Liberal Party formally abandoned that policy. Leader Susan Lee, she fronted the media alongside the energy spokesman Dan Tehan to confirm that they've scrapped that target that Scott Morrison set back in 2021.
They'd also repeal Labor's 43% emissions reduction target by 2030 and the 2035 target of a 62 to 70% reduction if they win government at the next election. At that announcement, the journalists absolutely hammered Lee about what this means for the Paris Agreement. Under Paris rules, you're required to set progressively increasing targets every 5 years. You can't go backwards.
So the question is, how can you stay in Paris but go backwards, lower the target. I reckon we might need to linger a little bit on this stay in Paris idea.
Yeah,
it gets thrown around a fair bit, that one.
It sounds quite sophisticated, doesn't it?
Staying in Paris. Yeah.
I'd like to stay in Paris. It means staying signed up to the process that was established at a breakthrough UN climate summit in 2015 that the vast majority of nations around the world are in on.
Yeah, they're still participating in that process, as is Australia. The whole thing is essentially about limiting climate warming, global warming, by 1.5 to 2 degrees. And the nations signed up to the Paris Agreement. They meet every year. It's at the COP. It's happening right now in Brazil, and they outline these either new emissions reductions targets, as you're saying, every 5 years. That's part of that process, or the annual meetings really catch up on the progress that's being made.
Yeah, so as the years go by, the targets increase, not decrease. And the experts reckon that limiting global warming requires zero emissions at some point in the future. This process has nominated 2050 as that long-term target, but Lee is suggesting Australia would commit to a softer emissions reduction target.
Yeah, so she said, and this is her quote, "If there are reasons why people in Paris or some United Nations organisation don't like it, I can deal with that." But the intention is to stay in the tent. Lee says that she would welcome a result that brought about zero emissions by 2050. It's just that that's not a target that a coalition government would have. So that was what the media was really focused on, that Paris and how we're going to meet our international obligations part. Lee, though, was really desperately trying to steer the conversation back to what it means for Australians.
Yeah, she kept saying electricity prices would be more affordable under the coalition, and she made a specific claim there. She said that Albanese promised that power prices would drop by $275, but instead they've gone up by $1,300. The coalition's pitch is essentially that they'll use all natural resources, and yes, that includes coal along with renewable sources like wind and solar, and all of that to bring down power prices.
Yeah, we should probably note that that $1,300 mark that the coalition says power prices have gone up by is hotly contested by Labor. They don't agree with that figure. The coalition also talked up using technology to reduce emissions. Dan Tehan says that Labor hasn't properly invested in technologies like carbon capture and storage. Again, we could go down a whole rabbit hole on exactly what that means. But essentially the critics of that say that it has been really promising for decades, but it hasn't actually delivered at scale.
The policy also includes actively supporting new and existing coal and gas plants and lifting Australia's ban on nuclear energy. Of course, we saw that come up prominently at the last election. Taxpayer subsidies would potentially be involved through modest, targeted underwriting, they say, to keep them in the system longer. They would also scrap nearly all of the current Labor government's existing climate legislation, including the 82% renewables by 2030 target.
There's a lot that's going under a coalition government if they get back into power in the next cycle. So after 4 years of bipartisanship on emissions reductions, it's been quite a rare, I guess, break because it's been such a contentious policy issue really for the last 20 years or so.
When we were in Canberra, it was the main issue.
Exactly right, and has been the thing that has derailed many a leader from Tony Abbott to Malcolm Turnbull to Julia Gillard to Kevin Rudd. It's now, again, a big policy divide that's sitting there between the coalition and Labor. We don't really know what the coalition's emissions reduction target is for 2030 and 2035. The Nats ditched, of course, that net zero target, as we said earlier this month. There will be a target. They talked about pegging it to the OECD average of what's being delivered, not the aspirational targets, but what's actually being delivered by developed economies around the world.
Yeah, right. Those details are to be worked out still, but Nationals leader David Littleproud welcomed the decision, obviously, saying it gives them great hope that they can work together on a joint position. But then there's drama within the Liberal Party itself.
Yeah, it was one of the things that happened this week. Moderate frontbencher Andrew Bragg, he threatened to quit the shadow cabinet over this if they did abandon net zero. Also, other moderates like Tim Wilson and Maria Kovacic, they've also opened the door to resigning if that 2050 target was removed. That's happened now. We're recording this on Friday. That might happen today. You never know. They might not resign. But there could be these front bench resignations from the coalition.
Yeah, and this whole chapter wasn't just about climate policy either. It's about Susan Lee's leadership and her lack of control over some of the members of her party and her coalition partner, of course, the Nats. Phil Curry from the Financial Review said that she was like a cork on the ocean, just bobbing along, giving everyone their say rather than actually leading them.
Yeah, it's been a big theme this week, hasn't it, about how Susan Lee has handled all of this. The next question, I guess, is what will Aussies think? It's a big question about how voters will actually receive that new policy position from the coalition. Former Liberal MP Keith Wallahan, who lost his Victorian seat, that was Menzies, that happened, of course, in May at the election. He's warned the Liberals that 26 of the 33 lost seats were in urban areas. And they're the areas where climate action really matters.
Yeah, and the point is it's hard for the coalition to win government without getting some, if not all of those seats back. But Lee is betting that voters care more about their power bills than they do about climate action.
Yeah, the coalition parties will now formalise their joint position tomorrow, onwards and upwards maybe.
Maybe? That'll be their hope anyway.
Yeah, it sure will. 3 other stories from the week. We've spoken a number of times this year about the Epstein-Trump saga. That is, of course, the relationship between the late pedophile Jeffrey Epstein and the United States president. The story's been bubbling away in the background. It has been for many, many months and if not years probably. It really blew up this week.
Yeah, it did. 3 emails were released by Democrats on the House Oversight Committee from documents that were provided to them by Epstein's estate. They were chosen from over 20,000 pages of documents that were released on Wednesday.
Yeah, you'd love to be the staffer going through those 20,000
AI,
pages.
help please.
And picking out the important ones. One of the emails was from Epstein to his partner, Ghislaine Maxwell. It was from back in April 2011. It said, and this is the quote from it, "I want you to realise that the dog that hasn't barked is Trump, and that an unnamed victim spent many hours at my house with him." The victim's name was redacted by Democrats when they released that document, but Republicans identified her as Virginia Giuffre.
Yeah, this was significant because Giuffre, who died by suicide earlier this year, had always said that Donald Trump didn't victimise her and wasn't involved in any wrongdoing. She had written in her memoir that Trump couldn't have been friendlier when she met him at Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, and Trump has always denied having anything to do with Epstein's sex trafficking of underage girls. But another email from 2019 had Epstein telling the author Michael Wolff, who is probably one of Donald Trump's most vocal critics at the moment, that Trump knew about the girls as he asked Elaine to stop. The White House says that these emails prove nothing.
The whole thing is so highly politicised. Republicans accuse Democrats of cherry-picking these documents right at a time when Trump wanted the focus to be on ending the government shutdown that's been dragging on for 43 days. It's the longest in US history.
Yeah, that shutdown, of course, ended on Wednesday night US time when Trump signed a bill after the House passed it. There's a whole lot of pressure, though, for the release of the Epstein file. This has been something that's been around US politics for years now. Where that's up to is that Congress is looking at a discharge petition, essentially a process that could lead to the release of those documents. For a vote to happen, they need 218 signatures. They haven't been able to get those, and some of that has come down to the delay of the swearing in of a new Congresswoman from Arizona.
So she finally was sworn in and she was the 218th signature. The Trump administration seemed pretty concerned about this, that the petition got the numbers. And there was a Republican called Lauren Boebert who was summoned to a meeting. She was one of the signatories to this petition, and they called her to a meeting in the White House Situation Room on Wednesday. That's that secure room that's usually reserved for national security crises. Officials, including Attorney General Pam Bondi and the FBI Director Kash Patel, met with her about the petition. She says that they didn't pressure her to take her name off, though.
And she's kept her name on it, Boebert, which is a pretty incredible thing being summoned to the White House to the Situation
I'll say,
room.
while Trump was posting on Truth Social saying you'd have to be a very bad or very stupid Republican to sign it. No pressure, Lauren.
But she has held firm. The Speaker is Mike Johnson, who's a Republican as well. He says that they'll vote on releasing those files next week. So that is something to keep on your news radar. Trump himself has been calling Republicans, trying to get them to take their name off that discharge petition. Probably be on the phone for a few days yet by the sounds of things. It doesn't seem to be working.
No. To cover off another Trump story this week, the BBC's Director General Tim Davie and the news chief Deborah Turness both resigned on Sunday. This followed criticism that a BBC Panorama documentary had misleadingly edited Trump's January 6 speech. This is, of course, going back to those riots from 4 years ago.
Yeah, of course, we've seen that footage so many times. Did you see the two bits that they put together? Yeah, it's one of those tricks of editing, of course. It essentially sliced together two parts of the speech that were almost an hour apart. Of course, Trump talks very long at these rallies and in these speeches. It made it appear that he was directly calling for violence at the Capitol on that 6th of January back in 2021. The BBC apologised for the error of judgment and Trump threatened them with $1 billion lawsuit.
Yeah, it wasn't the only issue raised. There were also concerns about the BBC's coverage of transgender issues and allegations of anti-Israel bias in their Arabic service. But the Trump edit was the catalyst for these two top executives stepping down.
Yeah, a big week for them. Onto a more domestic story and the announcement of violent crime adult time laws in Victoria. Youth crime is a really big issue across Australia, but it feels like Melbourne is probably the place that's getting a lot of attention. We talked about this not so long ago that I remember I'd been at a lunch in Melbourne and sat down and said to my lunch companion, how are things here? Is it as bad as people are saying? And he was like, my house has been broken into 3 times in the last 2 weeks. So, yeah, it's been a real focus of Melbourne being this youth crime capital.
Yeah, I've had some similar conversations with people down there. So many frightening videos of carjackings, violent robberies, gangs of armed teenagers breaking in, as you say, when people are asleep. And it's put a lot of pressure on the state government there to do something about it.
Yeah, so cue these new laws, which would see children as young as 14 facing adult-length sentences for certain crimes, including potentially life behind bars. There was a stat that we heard this week which paints the picture. At the moment, 34% of minors convicted of aggravated carjacking and aggravated home invasions are given jail time in the children's court, whereas 97% of adults convicted of those same offences are sent to prison.
Yeah, so these laws would address that difference basically. Certain offences would be tried in the adults' county court. Traditionally, the focus in those children's courts, I've seen them in operation, it's very much about rehabilitation and trying to give these kids a second chance, keep them out of detention. So the whole flavour of that really changes with these laws.
The announcement, though, comes as a bit of a surprise given Labor's in power in Victoria. It's sort of a bit contrary to their normal political stance of taking a more, I guess, sort of rounded view, as you said, of kids' rehabilitation, sort of that those adult time laws aren't really their natural sort of position. This has been sort of a policy, I guess, that's usually associated with the coalition government. In fact, I think they've been calling for it for quite some time. It was inspired, though, by David Crisafulli's Conservative government in Queensland, a big election promise that he made and has enacted since his election.
Yeah, law and order is always a big one at state elections. He brought in adult crime, adult time laws when he seized power last year, and he reckons that they're working. He says that there was a 6.5% drop in victim numbers in the first 9 months of this year.
Always questions about those numbers, though, isn't there, when it comes to that? No real evidence, some of the experts say, that the harsher laws actually work.
Yeah, that's right. Melbourne isn't the only place dealing with these issues. There's been a big focus, of course, in Alice Springs, in country New South Wales and in Sydney as well. So no doubt other state governments will be taking a few notes on how this all plays out in Victoria.
Yeah, exactly. Jodie, to finish us up, did someone say Menulog?
Well, you just did. You've obviously been paying attention to the ads. After midnight on Wednesday, the 26th of November, no one will be saying Menulog because it will have closed here in Australia. It is owned by a Dutch-based company called JustEatTakeaway.com and it's been operating in Australia for 20 years.
It feels like such a recent phenomenon, but not the case at all. I remember Brad Banducci, as you know, I worked at Woolies. He was the former Woolies boss. I remember having a conversation with him about those services because Uber Eats, when we had this conversation, had just really arrived and started to push into the market. And he told me that just wait and see, there will be one left standing. They are all throwing so much money into it for marketing and for trying to get sort of, I guess, market control. But in the end, there will be one.
He's a smart man, Brad Banducci. It's been obviously a competitive space. Remember Deliveroo folded a couple of years ago? It was never materially profitable and was apparently losing $3 million in cash per month in the end.
Yeah.
And Menulog said the Australian market was challenging.
Yeah, really challenging because the landscape is dominated, as I just mentioned, Uber Eats, DoorDash, they're both global giants. It made profitability a really significant issue. In recent times, Menulog wasn't profitable. The numbers that have been reported say that in 2024, Menulog reported a loss of $32.1 million, which was a bit of an improvement of the $110 million loss that they made in 2023. The other thing that's been called out after competition is that the company really heavily invested in these very expensive celebrity-led marketing campaigns.
Which clearly worked on you, Claire.
Exactly right.
Snoop Dogg and Katy Perry were two of them who fronted those campaigns, and that obviously added to the high operational costs, but it didn't translate into significant market share growth. When you look at it from that perspective, Ibis World says that Uber Eats has 54% of the Australian food delivery market.
Yeah, and that includes supermarket delivery. So whatever Woolies pulls up to your door with, or Coles or Harris Farm, DoorDash, Uber Eats having 54% of that market is just such a big position. It's a big player. Over 8.3 million Aussies actively use those online food delivery services through the websites and the apps. That was last year. Millennials are said to be the heaviest users.
I loved that stat. Nearly half of Australians, 48%, place repeat orders at least weekly, and that's probably myself and my family, I must admit.
Yep, you get into a routine.
Friday night.
They are very, very handy. Look, and we know that for plenty of people listening, they don't get access to those because you're living in the country or you're just not in the zone. I have to say, as a country girl, one thing that I love about my city life is the convenience of these things.
Yeah, so convenient.
Jodie, we're back with what's coming up. You would have heard in the intro that it's the week in news and what's coming up. So we put what's coming up back here. It's back in the weekly wrap. We tried it for a month. There's a few of you who think that it sits better here. We've got a month until the end of the year. We've got Kate Watson coming back on board who will put her sticky little paws all over News Club again, which
in the best possible way.
I'm really looking forward to. We've had a bit of feedback. We're just putting it back here and we'll work out what happens next year.
Yeah, we listen to you. Nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Indeed. Who knows what 2026 will bring, but whatever it is, it'll be really good. So thanks for persisting with us.
Yeah, Squizzes are an understanding bunch. Let's start with today, 1 p.m. AEDT or Sydney time. The Socceroos take on Venezuela for the FIFA Men's International. That's being played in Houston, Texas, and you can watch it on Paramount+.
It's also Women's Entrepreneurship Day. I think we know a bit about that at the Squiz, and it's the anniversary of the world's population hitting 8 billion. That was in 2022. It's now 8.2 billion. Sunday, we've talked about the coalition parties coming together. Of course, that is happening. That'll be in the news. It's also the Chilean presidential election.
Yeah, the country's current left-wing president, Gabriel Boric, is ineligible to run because of Chile's term limits. And it's a right-wing candidate, Jose Antonio Cast, who is leading the polls. But there is a strong likelihood of a runoff election on the 14th of December if no one gets more than that 50% vote needed.
Yeah, we're calling it out. There's about 40,000 people who were born in Chile who currently live in Australia. They're quite a big cohort. So that will be definitely on their radars. For a different sort of competition, the Wallabies are in Dublin.
Yeah, they're playing the Irish side as part of their spring tour. Kickoff is at 7:10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Saving Time. That seems quite civilised. And you can watch that one on Stan Sport.
On Monday, Foreign Minister Penny Wong will deliver a keynote address at the Australian Institute of International Affairs National Conference dinner.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, but it's one of those annual events in Canberra that tends to attract some really heavyweights in that world of geopolitics.
Yeah. Secretary General of the OECD, Matthias Cormann, will also be speaking at that conference. Our former finance minister, of course, who was there when we were in Canberra.
Indeed.
He now has that big global role. Also on Monday, the final public hearing for the House of Reps inquiry into the Thriving Kids initiative takes place in Canberra. It was called for after the huge backlash to the new reforms to the NDIS that were announced a few months ago.
Yeah, lots of interest in that and a lot of settling down around Thriving Kids to be done. We did actually a shortcut on that this week. That was on Thursday, so head to Squiz today if you want to get a bit more informed about what all of that means. Sticking with the Parliament theme, on Tuesday, there's an annual review for the 4 major banks.
That's the regular grilling of the House of Reps Standing Committee on Economics that they give to our big banking execs. Big profits and lots of redundancies. So they're 2 topics that are likely to come up.
Yep, indeed. Also on Tuesday, the Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands, Jeremiah Manolay, is in Australia to speak at a business forum. That's at the Brisbane Convention Centre. I had to actually look that up, that he was the Prime Minister, because I thought it was Manasseh Sogavare who's been doing that for a really long time.
We must have missed him going out.
No, exactly. Not being on the daily news run.
That's right.
I do have these gaps these days. Of course, we've had a very difficult patch with the Solomon Islands, with China sort of nudging in. So that relationship is always quite an interesting one. On Tuesday night, it's the Sydney Institute dinner. It's a really big one for corporate affairs types. The guest speaker there is Don Farrell, who, of course, is our trade minister. He's had a big year, tariffs and all.
Yeah, he's been around for a long time too, Don Farrell. Wednesday, ABC's Managing Director Hugh Marks will be at the National Press Club to talk about his vision for our national broadcaster. They've had a bit of a rough run too recently. We've talked about the BBC facing a lot of pressure from people like the US president, so it's probably good timing to hear how Hugh Marks has seen things.
I'm interested in that. I can't.
Well, we're media nerds,
exactly.
so we would be.
I want to know what's the plan. Also on Wednesday, the 2025 ARIA Awards, they begin with a red carpet at 5 p.m. Missy Higgins, Dom Dollar, the Hilltop Hoods are all up for awards. After that, I officially begin to feel old. Apparently the person to know is Nina Geraci.
Oh, I have not even heard of her, but her debut album, I Love My Computer, has already won lots of awards, 8 ARIA Music Award nominations, which is the most of any artist. Thursday, Wicked for Good, the sequel to last year's hit movie musical adaptation, is out in cinemas. It's hot off the heels of the first one, isn't it?
It feels like it wasn't that long ago, but I'm wondering, is that one on your radar with young kids?
It's on my radar because my daughter, my 9-year-old, will want to see that. Ariana Grande is a bit of a hit in our house.
Got you.
Also on Thursday, Tonga has a general election. The topic of voting rights has been in the spotlight in the lead up to that, as rules stipulate that to be eligible to vote, you have to be in the country.
It's an issue because for a country of 103,000 people, they're the ones who are there who will get to vote. There's an estimated 200,000 Tongans living overseas, mostly in New Zealand and Australia.
So double the number overseas than are there.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the money that they send home makes up to 41% of the country's GDP, which is the highest proportion of any country in the world.
Yeah, so Tongans living elsewhere are contributing so much to the country's economy, but they're not able to vote. You can see why there's, some issue around that.
Absolutely.
Of course, when our Aussies overseas want to vote, we send everything off to the embassies and consulates and they do it.
It's a whole exercise, yeah.
Friday, it is the start of the Ashes.
Huge for Test cricket fans, huge for cricket fans more broadly. It's such an iconic series, the Ashes. The start of that campaign is in Perth, then it's on to Brizzy, Adelaide, Melbourne for Boxing Day and Sydney for the New Year's Test. It's the first time, though, I had to check these dates because I have sort of fixed in my brain that any of these summer test series start in Brisbane. It's the first time in over 40 years that the opening match won't be in Brizzy. At the Brizzy Test, when they do get to it, it's going to be a day-night one. So innovation.
Really mixing things up there in the world of cricket. In a sport especially known for its traditions, there's some pretty big changes.
Yeah, there are. They're not usually up for experimentation, unlike Squizzes with our What's Coming Up section. So thank you. Squiz Recommends, we'll move on to there. I have watched, because I've been a little bit sick this week and had a little bit of downtime, All Her Fault, which is on Binge. It's Sarah Snook, who, of course, is the Australian actress who was huge for all sorts of reasons.
Succession.
Succession is, of course, the big thing. I actually text messaged Kate to say I don't think you should watch this because it's about a child abduction and it's full on for the first.
I might not cope with that either then.
And that's why I wanted to raise it, really. It's a great watch. I really enjoyed it. It's not the best sort of mystery that I've ever watched, but like Sarah Snook's incredible. Like I'll watch anything that she's in. I think she's just outstanding. There's a couple of people in it who are a little bit iffy, but the storyline's pretty good. It's really engaging. But I reckon if you've got young kids, just go carefully because it's pretty full on.
Might be a bit triggering.
Yeah.
My recommendation this week is very much one for the political nerds. It's a little bit niche. Civic Duty on the ABC by Annabelle Crabb. It's her new series.
Yeah.
It's a 3-part series all about our voting system, basically.
Yep.
And she's got some great interviews on there. Kevin Rudd popped up, Tony Abbott popped up, some good journos. And there are lots of interesting facts. Like, for example, she talks about how our early elections in Australia were these drunken, riotous affairs. And that's, they reckon, one of the reasons why they didn't want women to vote at that time. I'm sure there were other reasons too. But they thought, how would women fit into this picture? They can't be out at the pub with all the drunken men.
There's so much that's interesting about our democracy. Of course, one of the wonderful things about it, I think, has been talked about more and more is our compulsory system of voting. I know they talk about this in the series as well.
Preferential voting and the secret ballot started here. There's so many kind of interesting facts that make us unique.
Yeah, and make our democracy really robust in a way that it has great participation. And
we do talk about
need.
Politics quite a lot on the Squiz, so I thought there'll be a few people out there who'll be into that.
Exactly. And, of course, we had Annabelle in talking to Bryce not that long ago. She talked about her new book, which is about the prawn in Parliament House. Do you remember that? The little prawn, the fossilised prawn in the Great Hall?
Yes.
So, Annabelle fans
the queen of interesting facts.
Absolutely. Get onto that on the ABC. It's on iView at the moment, so you can dive in and watch that anytime. Squiz Press, last week you missed out, Jodie, because we'd had a minute microwave cake.
I saw it and I was quite jealous from afar. I do think that anything with Nutella is going to be good. It sort of carries any other dodgy ingredient.
For sure. Nikki made that for us while Larissa and I were recording. Nikki resigned after that.
No.
I don't want to make a correlation between those two events, but literally later that day she told me that she's off.
Oh, after the Nutella cake. That's a way to bring things down, Nikki.
No, look, she's got a wonderful new job. She's a grad and we've been really, really thrilled to work with her for almost a year. She'll be heading off in December, but we've got a job vacant is what it means. If you're a grad, if you know a grad, if you're looking for someone who's just really starting out in their medi-career, don't have to be a grad, you could be a year or two into it and want to work with us here at the Squiz. It's a really terrific role. It's a very digital publishing focused role, so helping us get our stuff out, whether that's a newsletter or whether that's social media. Also working with me on things like the Saturday Squiz newsletter, wrangling all of the dates, keeping a track of the diary.
Important role.
It's a really good one to get your career started, I think, and working with some really terrific people. Part of that is working with Rampart as well. So Joe Aston helping with the publishing on the Rampart side as well. So, I reckon if you know someone, we'll put the link to the LinkedIn jobs ad. If you know someone, shoot it through to them. We'd really love to hear from them.
Yeah, good shout.
I think that's it for us this week. Thank you, Jodie. Have a good weekend.
See you next week.